Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in for this PI webinar. I am delighted to be joined tonight, if you're in Australia, or today in the UK, by Alex Green, Executive Director, Southeast Asia for Grok Global, by Truong, who's Head of International Student Recruitment at the University of Newcastle in Australia, by Haike Manning, Managing Director of the Lightpath Consulting Group, and Nguyen, Regional Representative for Ohio University, based out of Vietnam. Today, we're finding out all about Vietnam and what an interesting and exciting destination it is for international education. I just found out that the only thing closed right now in Vietnam are the karaoke rooms. So Vietnam is back to normal in many ways, and we're going to be hearing from our panelists today about operating in Vietnam and the potential it holds for international education and how they're coping with the COVID-19 crisis too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alex first. Just one other point of note before we start. There are questions and polls at the bottom, so we'd love you to answer our polls. And if you'd like to pose a question using the question function, or you could vote for others, and then I'll be addressing those later during today. So thanks very much, and over to Alex first.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Alex Green, and I'm Executive Director for Southeast Asia for Grok Global Services. Grok's a professional services firm focused on helping institutions engage more deeply in Asian student recruitment markets through an array of in-country services. So we're not an education agent, but rather we provide a framework, infrastructure and support that allows institutions to be successful in international recruitment. This includes the ability to deploy in-country representatives through our legally compliant framework, as well as engage in specialized localized marketing, market research, and also partnership development services. So currently we work with around 50 institutions from destination countries, including the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland. In terms of my specific role and background, I've been at Grok for 5 years. I oversee our offices in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. I also head up our in-country staffing service, as well as managing about a dozen or so client engagements, supporting both staff and the institutions that they represent. In a previous life, I worked for a large public university in the UK, UW Bristol, in a number of roles that focused on student recruitment and partnership development. Grok offers those services that I mentioned across 4 main markets. We're active in China, India, Malaysia, and most recently in Vietnam. We set up a hub in Malaysia 5 years ago to serve Southeast Asia, but we quickly realized the importance of Vietnam, of having our own presence there. And in 2018, we established the office in Ho Chi Minh City. We've always known that Vietnam was important for a number of reasons, but particularly for institutions looking to diversify their recruitment beyond China and India. It's a rapidly growing market, as we'll hear, but it also has what we think are certain demographic, cultural, linguistic differences that mean that it's maybe harder to penetrate than other markets, and does require an in-country presence to achieve that. So I think those factors, were the reasons why we wanted to establish the office, and thankfully it looks like it was the right decision. And the Ho Chi Minh office is in fact our fastest growing office at Grok. And we have seen an increase in interest even during the COVID-19 situation. We've been actively hiring new staff. We have 9 institutions working with us in Vietnam, deploying representatives there, and we employ a staff of 13. So we've had really some quite quick growth, which has been fantastic. The majority of institutions tend to be universities from the US and Canada, and a slight majority there, and the rest from Australia and New Zealand, which makes sense given the relative market size. To comment just briefly on the current situation, our Vietnam office is open, and you can see in one of these windows that is our meeting room. So our Vietnam office was one of the first to go into lockdown very early on in February. Our staff have been engaging in virtual recruitment activity for longer than most. But as we're here, the shutdown has essentially been lifted as of April 22nd, and there's been a rapid return to normalcy, barring karaoke and beauty salons. So our staff, including Ha, who you can see here, are back in the office, and they continue to be very busy. And you'll hear more about this. We're seeing positive signs of a return to face-to-face recruitment activity, which is really exciting. Obviously, we're not going to see large agent events that would have been scheduled through the summer, but we are seeing agents' offices opening, schools are open, so visits, one-to-one consultations with parents and students are starting to happen again. And we've just heard that next week there's going to be a high school fair in Hanoi, the first one that we know of. Our staff will be attending that. So it's exciting, but I think Vietnam remains less affected than other countries in the region. But that doesn't mean we're not going to see some impact. And on student and parent sentiment, the economic fallout, which I'm sure we'll discuss. But I'm hopeful. If we look at the 2008 financial crisis, outward mobility from Vietnam actually increased after that. So we may well see, this strong interest, the Vietnam growing interest, continuing through this period. So the pent-up demand is going to be slowly released, and in-country recruitment is normalizing sooner than other markets. And that means that having boots on the ground and having an in-country presence is going to be, even more important as things picked up. So I think for institutions that are thinking about the market or are worried or haven't engaged yet or are worried that they maybe can't, our message is that, now is a great time to consider that and to consider engaging.
And so just to be clear, Alex, so is the majority of the work you're doing in Vietnam, is it appointing people like Ha who can then work as boots on the ground, as you say?
Yes. So to date, that's been one of the main services that we provide, identifying suitable representatives, working with universities on their priorities, what they want out of the market, and finding the right kind of person for them, employing them and supporting them in a constructive framework that makes them comfortable and happy and productive. And we also look at institution-specific needs. So, before we go into an engagement like that, we may do a research piece on whether that is the right decision to do. We want institutions to be successful. There's a lot for everybody in Vietnam, but we want to be sure about that. So sometimes there's a market research angle to this as well. Okay.
Well, Ha's a great example of someone you've hired. Experience of the UK system, American husband and Australian accent. That's what That's what I've worked out.
She's has fantastic and a great example of one of our representatives.
So, Ha, do you want to tell us a bit more about your role then and how you work for Ohio State?
Thanks, Amy. I work for Ohio University.
Oh, Ohio University, sorry.
Don't worry, they're the same. We are a little bit better. Well, we are the first university in Ohio, the first Catholic university. So I am employed by Grok to represent Ohio University based in Vietnam. So basically what I do is I look after students in Vietnam. I recruit students, meet with agents, meet with school, attend fairs, workshop, help students through their application process. Mm-hmm. Basically, talk to them about their major choices and what we're good at, and helping them until they arrive in the school. And so, basically, whenever I talk about Ohio University, as you could see earlier, which is like, we this and we that. And that's some of my work here in Vietnam.
And what has been students' concerns surrounding in the coronavirus crisis? I mean, have there been many students reaching out to you, not sure what to do about enrolling next year? Do you think people are now moving to make a final decision about their intent?
Well, the short answer is yes. the parents and the students do have a lot of concern. But the three main themes that I've seen, because I work very closely with parents and students here in Vietnam, are, yes, some of them have decided to choose international university locally, especially we have some more competitions here inside Vietnam, and they've decided with a better offering in their opinion, and also, right here in Vietnam, they feel safer. They have decided to decline, not go, abort their plan anymore. They don't go. But there are still a group of people who have come and talked to me about deferring into the spring semesters or fall semester next year, because they want to make sure that they will be able to keep the scholarships until going into the next semesters. And luckily and very happily, there are still a group of parents and students who come and talk to me and say, we still want to go. But what they're doing is that they are in waiting mode. They want to see if the situation in the US is better. And I think ultimately it really dependent on the destination market. Because as you know, news for the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, it changed differently, and the sentiment I get from parents and students that I'm working with closely is that they still want to go. They're just waiting to see if the situation ever going to get better. And they're not going to suddenly change the destination, but the health and concerns also like the highest concern. So that's the main themes that I've been seeing.
So do you think if deferring by one term was possible, that's an option many Vietnamese students might take?
Well, I can only really speak for Haike University, but we have announced plan to actually teach on campus this fall.
Okay.
And so, because there's only 6 confirmed cases of the COVID-19 in Athens, Ohio. And so that's like a really good news. I usually parents and students. And for them to really want to defer because of safety concern, we're trying to reassure them that there are, safety precautions put in place to help protect the children and, to make them feel safer. But I guess because now it's June and the embassies are not yet open. So those that have planned to defer, I'm still in touch with them to, put that on hold for maybe 1 more month.
Do you have any idea when the embassy may open?
Well, there have not been any official announcement, but I talked to an advisor yesterday, and she said that the latest update is that they want to open soon, and the priority will be given to F1 students, but there's no official announcement going out yet.
Okay, that's quite promising then.
Yeah, well, I mean, F1 is closed, right? They time sensitive, so.
Yeah. Absolutely. And how are you managing to communicate with students and parents? Are parents very involved in the decision-making process? I assume they are.
Absolutely, a lot. So I have this one case of a friend of mine have this friend who's the head of a big bank in Vietnam. She wants the child to go to America. And because of personal connection, she knew about me. She came and talked to me because she just wanted to know more about different school. And she put me in touch with her son. I talked to him. After a lot of ongoing communication, she made him apply. And because she made him apply, well, she's still the decision. You know this, right? It's they are involved in the decision making a lot. And because he had to apply, he started looking more into what the US has to offer and compared to Canada. And luckily, also the program that he wants to apply, we have some good reputation for. And now he's just, keeping both offers and just wait out. So
right, yeah, we're hearing that a lot actually. A lot of people are still waiting. Over to you, Hung. So you've been working with the Vietnamese market for a long time now. Do you want to tell us a bit more about how long you've been working with Vietnam? I know you're based in Newcastle, Australia. So thanks for staying up late to talk with us.
Yeah, good evening from Australia. So a little bit about myself. My parents are Chinese, but I was born in Vietnam, and then we migrated to Canada. And then in the late 90s, I came to Hong Kong, and I never left Asia. So my first employer, EF education, a private education company, sent me to Vietnam in 2000 to set up the EF operation in Vietnam there. So I was there from 2000 to 2007. In market, recruiting students directly and via agents. And then I left Vietnam in 2007, and then I moved on to different institutions, but having a global portfolio. And so now I'm at the University of Newcastle. We've been here since 2017, and I head up international student recruitment here. And so for me, the past 20 years, the Vietnamese market has changed completely. I mean, but there are a few things that hasn't changed. So migration is still an objective for many Vietnamese students. And when you're looking at the Vietnamese market, as Alex mentioned before, I mean, you're looking at a population about getting to be about 100 million, right? And 70% of that 100 million are under 40 years old. So it's a very, very young population. So the potential is huge. And with the trade war between China and the US in the past few years, more and more factories from China have moved to Vietnam. So, and then suddenly now you have a growing middle class. So what happens is there's a shortage in skilled labor. If a foreign company goes into Vietnam, they're going to have problem hiring skilled people. And so because also of the local public education in Vietnam that is not up to par versus other countries. So you're seeing people with wealth that wanted to study abroad. For Australia, international student is a $32 billion industry per year. So when we recruit, it's volume. Yeah? I know many institutions, countries recruit quality, but we're talking about volume here because for us it is an industry, and for us to grow in volume, so we mostly work with education agents, and because Australia is international education is a big industry, the third biggest industry in the country, but it's heavily regulated. Because it is heavily regulated, that's why we need to work via education agents. 70 to 80% of international students coming to Australia come via an education agent, and with this COVID-19, I mean we're really looking at our partners, the education agents and the students. So first of all, we have the agents. So when Vietnam went into lockdown, I think the agent counselors they were a bit shocked. So I think they had problem recruiting new students online because it was difficult for them to do. They weren't able to do it face to face. So at that time, their objective was to retain the existing students that they had. Luckily, the lockdown didn't last so long in Vietnam. And then now they're back, so we're seeing inquiries, we're seeing demand that's coming through. Mm-hmm. The second thing is of course when students can't travel, agents will not get commission. So we're looking at how we can support them financially. Well, we can't give them cash, but we can look at other ways in terms of commission payment. How we can make it more flexible for them to keep their business going. We have agent counselors who have taken salary cuts. So what can we help them in order to survive through these challenging times? And the student side, it was interesting to hear what the feedback from the US side. From the Australia side, it was I think the feedback was the same when the virus hit. So students were reluctant to go. They didn't want to come, and then I think what happens around 4 or 5 weeks ago, for us, Australia is quite, it was quite encouraging, because students realized that come July, August, September, whenever the intake is, they can't go anywhere anyway, right? There's nowhere that they can go globally. So, US, UK, Canada, no borders will be open. So they're quite concerned about the delay in the program. So we're finding out, we're witnessing more and more students are taking the online option. So they're willing to go online learning, and then wait it out until our borders open, that they can come on. So we're seeing them, willing to do that. However, with online learning, they're going to expect a discount. So then it is something that we also have to work with the students, with our partners, and then to see how we can get them to do online learning and then transfer them here once the border opens. So for us, it's really the COVID-19 is really showing us our relationship with the partners and also with the students, and it is this time, these kind of challenges that make us hope that we have a T&E program in Vietnam we can deliver for our students, and then on offshore, and then they can come onshore. But I think with these crises, it really makes you think and how we need to be prepared for our business going ahead.
Interesting. I know we're going to hear from Haike on T&E opportunities, but I'm interested, just going back to the point about the Vietnamese students in your pipeline. So will you consider giving them a discount for the online portion of their studies?
Yeah, we do. So we're looking, we're already offering discount studies. And then we're because of the exams that's going to be delayed. So we're many of our peers as well in Australia, we're deferring our intake. So we're most of us are delaying by 2 to 3 weeks. But then also they're not going to get the result in time. So what are the alternatives are we looking in recognizing the final result? So we have to be flexible, right? Because if we cannot be flexible, the student will be it will be disadvantage to students and also our partners. And then we're also looking at reduce load. So if they take less a lighter load online, and then they can wait it out and then come onshore and then do more modules, and then so they can compensate for that. So we're trying to look at many different ways where it would serve both the students and our partners.
Interesting. And what types of programs is there a typical program that is very popular with Vietnamese students, or is it quite diverse?
Yeah, so 20 years ago, business was the program, and now we're seeing it's becoming more diverse. Engineering, we're seeing in education and arts, we're seeing in health, science, medicine, etc. And it's something that we always talked discussed with our partners, because in Australia, getting genuine students is quite important, because we get penalized by our government if we don't if we don't get genuine students, and our partners always say that if a student is genuine, he or she will study engineering or something else. If he or she is not genuine, they'll study business now. So anyway, that's their feedback. It's not mine.
Okay, and so just one more question. How have you seen your percentage of your international student population populated by the Vietnamese? How have you seen that grown over time?
Yeah, so Australia, Vietnam, and I'm sure in US and Canada, in other places, Vietnam has always been the top 10 source country for many of these destinations. And for us, we have 8,000 international students, and of course the top destination will always be China until something drastic happens. And then the second biggest population will be India, and then Vietnam would be around fifth or sixth, and then we're seeing that it's moving up. But I think one thing that it's that the Vietnamese students are really good students is what we've seen academically, and their experience has been quite positive when they're in country.
Very good, very good, good. So over to you, Haike. Tell us a bit more about yourself, Lightpath, and I know you have experience of sort of transnational education, which I guess everyone might be considering a bit more readily now, as Hung said.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight or this afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Haike Manning. I'm the founder and managing director of Lightpath Consulting Group, and we're based here in Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, in Vietnam. I've been very fortunate to have been based here for almost 8 years now. First in Hanoi, in my previous role, where I was New Zealand ambassador to Vietnam. And I liked the country so much, we decided to stay on and set up our own business. And so we moved down to Saigon about 3 years ago, and I established Lightpath Consulting Group. Lightpath Consulting Group has a specialisation or a focus on international education, and we're only focused on Vietnam. Like Grok, we're not an agent, we're a professional services firm as well, and we offer 3 main types of services to international education providers. The first are advisory services, so market research or business planning to help people work out how best to engage in the market. The second thing that we do is we provide in-market support services as well. So a little bit like Grok, except our services differ slightly in that often we offer slightly more flexible, lower cost services. So instead of having to have a full-time in-country rep, with us you can have a consultant for a certain number of hours per month, for example. I think both are great options, by the way. Just depends sometimes on the budget and how people want to enter the market. We also do digital marketing services as part of that in-market support. And the third thing that we do, which relates, I guess, more closely to transnational education, is market entry services. And there, we're really focused on how we can support people to come in and deliver their programs in some way in Vietnam. And kind of the 2 main things, I guess, we're focused on at the moment in that space are obviously supporting partnerships between Vietnamese and international universities and higher education institutions. And the second one is helping international education providers who actually want to set up and offer their own operations, helping them as well in the market here. Vietnam is, I mean, you've heard from some of the other speakers, but super interesting, dynamic place. And certainly since that last 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, life has returned to the streets, the bustle is back, the traffic is back, all the good and the bad of sort of normal life. We don't have all the foreign tourists here at the moment, but certainly there's a real sense of people getting back to their lives at the moment. And just a couple of data points, I guess, for people who maybe haven't had the privilege of visiting this country yet, is that, you know, aside from 100 million people in Vietnam and those fantastic demographics, what you also have in Vietnam is you have the fastest growing country in the world over the last quarter century, aside from China. And PwC, for example, in their forecasting of economic growth, have projected that Vietnam will be the fastest middle to large size growing economy on the planet through to 2050. So a fabulous trajectory from the past and continuing into the future. And what's interesting about that as well is that when you look at what happens as people get wealthier here in Vietnam, the first thing they spend money on once they have discretionary income is education. So there's huge upside here in terms of as this country continues to go ahead. And of course, we hope, you know, that coronavirus and things will settle down pretty soon. But assuming they continue on the trajectory, the story is incredibly positive here, not just for the country, but also for the international education sector as well. both for those who are looking to recruit and send and have Vietnamese students go to the host institutions, but also for institutions that actually want to take an even longer term view and actually start to set up delivery operations here in Vietnam.
So tell us a bit more about what that looks like. If I was an institution wanting to put some tentative footsteps down for the first time, I mean, what might I do, and what might it look like? Where might those footsteps lead me?
Yeah, well, you could talk to Lightpath or to Grok in the first instance, would probably be a good start. But aside from that, I mean, there's a lot of different kind of T&E plays that you can look at here. So I would say that transnational education in Vietnam is still probably relatively early days compared to some other markets in Asia. But there are three kind of main types of T&E plays here at the moment in Vietnam. The first one are franchise programs, where international institutions essentially franchise their programs for delivery here in Vietnam. And that's dare I say, it's sort of relatively light touch. I mean, there's still risks and a lot of management of it, but it's relatively light touch entry point for T&E. The second one would be partnerships, twinning programs. So traditional 2+2 kind of programs where the foreign and the local universities, they come together and they join the design sort of a collaborative program, have some collaborative teaching, and then student will start here and then transfer often to complete overseas. And then the third sort of main T&E play at the moment would be those that want to set up their own operations and deliver here in the market. So we have some quite well-known examples here in Vietnam of international branch campuses like RMIT. It's probably the best known. You have others like BUV, British University Vietnam, which is a slightly different makeup, but still very interesting and a big play here. And then you have those that are setting up what we call joint campuses, where they partner with more deeply with a local partner to deliver their programs here. And if you're looking for a really interesting recent example of that, Swinburne and FPT, which is a private university here, they've got a really interesting partnership that they've set up here.
And would you say, and I guess this is a question for you and everyone else maybe, would you say that it's a different sector of strata of students who would consider doing a 2+2 compared with, I mean, is there a prestige value to doing the whole thing offshore, or do you think actually it's just a way of growing your Vietnamese market and you'd have other students who would always just do 2+2 because they couldn't afford to do 4 years or 3 years abroad?
Maybe I'll start with a general comment and then others can chip in with that. I think in general, what's interesting about T&E in Vietnam is that yes, in some cases it connects through to your sort of your recruitment goals and your efforts to get students to come to your host institution. But actually, in the main part, the really interesting T&E plays are targeting a different segment of the population. So you've got a relatively small proportion of Vietnamese who can afford to send their kids overseas for full study. Now, at 100 million people, that's still quite a lot of kids that can go, but it's a relatively small part of the top of the triangle. And T&E really targets that next big segment of families who have growing income and have the ability to pay for some better quality education, but they can't afford to send their kids overseas for a full education that might cost $150,000 to $200,000. So I think primarily a T&E play is about trying to tap into ultimately a different segment of the market.
If I could add something, yeah, I believe there are definitely different segments, but also for some institutions, T&E is an integral part of their recruitment strategy in Vietnam, and I see this a lot with UK institutions. If you look at the UK institutions who've done particularly well and have a large market share, they're usually ones running programs in country that allow students to transfer either to top up their degree or 2+2, or various models in between. And that's worked very well for a number of British universities and other destinations, over the past decade or so. And what we're hearing anecdotally as well is that those Vietnamese students who do have the budget to study abroad, but are focused on getting into a prestigious institution, especially those from the north in Hanoi, if they don't achieve that, they won't look at another option, even though they're qualified. And they may look at studying an international program locally, biding their time, so to speak, before they apply, or maybe even taking that entire undergraduate degree in country at some of these branch campus-like institutions, and then maybe looking at studying abroad at that prestigious destination for postgrad. I think outside of the big cities, in the second-tier cities in Vietnam, that's where maybe the segment that Haike refers to might lie, where they're not really concerned about the overseas study experience, but they are concerned about the qualification. So attracting those students to these programs, there's going to be more growth. I recognize that Vietnam is at a reasonably early stage, but there's also going to be, I think, a lot more local provision, which is going to play into competition for our institutions as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a lively marketplace. It sounds like, Hung, you might be looking at some sort of
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's for us, for Australia, again, it goes back to my point where many students that go overseas are looking for migration, and Australia has a very transparent migration pathway. And in order to do that, the minimum that they have to study in Australia is 2 years, minimum 2 years, in order for them to get post-study work rights and then migration. So, but having said that, I mean, for us, the students who come, they come for the full degree. But having said that, what has changed versus 10 or maybe 5 years ago is, in the past, you have students who would go overseas to do English and then the main program. Mm-hmm. But now they prefer to do English in Vietnam and then do the main program overseas, because that will save them a lot of money. Yeah, and like I think what Alex says, in the what we call tier 2, tier 3 cities, they may be going for these twinning 2-for-2 programs, but in the main cities, we're seeing that even younger kids are going. There's lots of students in Melbourne doing high school and then doing the whole degree here. So yeah, we're seeing the reverse. Yeah, they're getting younger and younger.
That would suggest that there's well-funded parents then happy to send their loved one.
I just wanted to add, we're a bit of jargon, and I noticed from one of the questions. We're talking about TNE as in transnational education, so a foreign degree curricula offered in country within Vietnam. I know there are some parts of the world that don't use this, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. We do tend to jangle the jargon, don't we? In terms of those questions, there's lots of questions coming in. So the most popular question is, when talking to, this is one for you, Ha, I think. When talking to a representative from a university, what is important to a Vietnamese family? What do they want to see in that representative, and what don't they want to see?
Well, when I talk to parents and students, what I usually do not do is oversell my university. Like, parent comes, and I've seen a lot, like a strong interest. They come because they want sometimes unfiltered information. Obviously, they can totally do a research about the university, right? But when they come to you, they also want a personal touch to it. And so what we usually do is actually take a step back and then ask them what they want, what they're looking for, and then take a look at their interests, and so that we can cater our offering. And it's a word of information. Before they come to the university and sit at the table to talk to the rep, they probably already know about the university and some basic information, but they may already know about ranking, they may already know about employment rate, but sometimes they actually want the student stories, or how the actual students studying there, how they're feeling about university. So basically, the first thing is to give them genuine information and how you actually feel about it, and build a personal connection with them, just to make sure that the information you provide to them are relevant, instead of you can just go online and look at a website.
Of course. So it's obviously essential then that you visited the university that you're representing.
Yeah. Yes. Totally. Yes. It's nicer to talk about experience, and one of the selling points for me when I talk about Ohio is the fact that it's beautiful, and because I've been there, I've seen it myself. I'm like, there are like 300 cherry blossom trees around the campus, and most of the students and parents do not know about this. It's not necessarily important, but it's a nice touch to start a conversation with them, and they will be more intrigued to know why the university has a nickname of Harvard by the Hawking, things like that. A little personal touch to it, and a view from there. That's what I usually do.
Great, thank you. I'm going to stay with you, I think, because the next most popular question is so we've touched on the importance of agents, but it says, what are the main student recruitment channels? So I guess there will be some students, please do tell me. I mean, are there some students who just want to engage virtually? They don't want to visit an agency? Can they contact you straight away? I know you told me yesterday that you use the sort of WeChat platform to communicate with students sometimes, but what are the trends in terms of the main recruitment channels?
We don't use WeChat here. It's actually an equivalent app to WeChat here. It's called Zalo, Z-A-L-O. It's like a messenger platform, but you connect with them using a mobile number, because not all parents and students want to give out Facebook, but not all of them use smartphone they don't use iPhone or Android, different types of phones, and they connect with you using Zalo. I've had a lot of parents who come to my table and talk to me, and at the end of the conversation, they ask me, "Do you have Zalo that I can add you?" And talk to me on it. So even during lockdown, I was able to connect with parents and students on the chat platform, update my information about my university on it, and sometimes some students just drop me the document using Zalo because they don't want to drop me an email. They just drop the file and then they're done.
So so are these students that connect with you at a fair then, as a student fair?
Well, so basically the different approach that I have to students, yes, they connect with me at fairs, they connect with me at my high school workshop and visit prior to the pandemic. And also I am personally in touch with all the students on my application list, just to, I'm touching point with all of them, keep a connect with them, keep it personal, talk to them, let them know that we're here, address their concerns and things like that. But in terms of finding new students, we are an early adopter of Concourse, which is basically what we use to find new leads and connect with high schools and students, high school counselors. And we'll be able to see their profile in it and see if students match their profile with what we're looking for. And if students say we're looking for tuition fee of 25,000, then we know, okay. And when we give them information about our university, then they'll connect with us. So
okay.
That's how we use it, yeah.
Great. And Hung, from your perspective, what would you say are the main recruitment channels that you use?
Yeah, so for us, it's mainly through our partners, education agents. We do have partnerships, articulation partnerships with institutions. We do work with sponsors. So Ministry of Education, they do have sponsorship programs for research students. We do matching funding grants, etc. And we also have students that apply directly, but that's quite rare for us because the main bulk of our channels is coming through the agents, and that's where we support or we invest most in.
How many agents would you say you have in Vietnam?
Well, see, because again, it goes back to bringing in genuine students. So I know there's thousands in Vietnam, but we really work closely with less than 20. So with those, we really invest our time, resources, to make work. And then many of them we work with for over 10 years. So it's not a 1 or 2 year relationship. It's been a long time, and it helps is that I have a very small team in Australia. And I have a very big team in overseas and in 6 countries, and Vietnam included. So having people in country, it also helps to support the our partners, especially now where we can't travel. So
sure. Another quick question: how do you know who is a good agency to work with, a good agency partner?
Yeah, it's a well. When I started in my career and you know hitting the road is trial and error. It's talking to people. Back then was the British Council and etc. But then so over time, I have built up people, partners that I trust. But I think and maybe this is an advice. It goes back to how regulated the Australian market is. So it is by law, or all Australian institutions, we have to comply by law that we list all of our agents on our website. So you have to think that these agents have been vetted, have been trialed, have done well. So then if you go on any of our peers or even our website, the agents on there, yeah, they would be trustworthy education agents.
Good. I think that's very useful advice. Right, let's go to some more questions. What is Vietnam's relative market volume for different destination countries? I'd asked this earlier, but so few people have voted for it. I guess the question is, yeah, which are the most popular countries?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to take that one, Alex?
Yeah. The overall market size is, I think, looking around 130,000 Vietnamese students studying overseas, and that's growing rapidly by over 15% a year. For specific destination countries, that growth is much higher. So the US is dominant with, I think, around 25,000 Vietnamese students, followed by Australia with about 15, 16. Canada comes close on Australia with, I think, around 12, 13,000, and the UK is considerably lower, around 3,500. Now, the split in most of those markets is 70% undergrad and the rest are post, except for the UK, where we are looking at much more of an even split between undergraduate and postgraduate study. I left out Japan. Japan is actually in the top list. The students studying in Japan are pursuing different programs and also immigration options as well. But they deserve a mention because that's still an important market, the destination market.
Brilliant, thank you.
Can I just add to that? I think Japan has been popular in the past, say, I don't know, 5 or 6 years because of the job opportunity back in Vietnam, and also when you look at country data, destination data, I think you can also break it down because Vietnam has nearly 100 million, but in the north, Hanoi, the people that would have a different preference for destination versus people in the south. It can be that much difference between the north and the south, the two ends.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. I'm going to try and get through a few more questions. So sorry, can I just go to a couple more questions because I've just realised we've only got 10 minutes. Or do you want to go quickly, Haike?
I was just going to say, like, in terms of the real mover in terms of destination in the last few years, in terms of English-speaking destinations, has been Canada. Canada's grown super quick from a very small base to being pretty similar now to Australia and the US. So obviously with very attractive migration policies and proof of funds policies, they've positioned themselves very well in the market.
Thank you. The next question, which I like, is will COVID-19 make Vietnam even more of a scholarship market? I think it's important to reference the pandemic. We haven't talked about it that much, have we? But how is it going to impact the market?
I mean, just a point of fact, most Vietnamese students to study overseas, 90+% are self-funded. The government scholarship students, I think only make up 5%. And so for the vast majority, they can afford to study overseas. So the concept of scholarship still plays a role, but it's a slightly different role. It's not coming from a point of financial need is coming from a point, I would say, of prestige. So being awarded a scholarship, even a small amount, retains a high level of importance to Vietnamese families, and I'm sure others can add to this. So the strategy for the universities is to, even for high-ranked institutions, is to be able to offer something maybe academic merit-based that gives the student a sense of that achievement. So it's a different, it's an interesting dynamic, but different to other markets.
And Hung, you mentioned just yesterday, I think, that scholarships, you think.
Yeah, it's like Alex says, it's bragging rights. But then what we're seeing is as you get a bigger middle class, there will be people who are marginal. So then it's when you're giving that $5,000 or $10,000 a year, that will make a difference to tip them over. So as I think because 10 years ago you had the top 5% of the population that goes overseas, and regardless how much it is, they can afford it. But now you've got this growing middle class where, yeah, price is an issue, and for us in institutions, it's getting competitive. As I mentioned, the competition is not in how much commission we give, because I think that's been we've all been quite fair on that. But it's the scholarship that many institutions are offering, and like we're all saying now, is it the race to the bottom, and is that the trend?
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Another question here from Edna Zhang, who says, at the end of last year, there was a high visa refusal rate for students to go to Canada, mainly for those who have an ESL offer and an academic offer letter. Do any of you know if the situation is changed or getting better now? I don't know if you have any insight. Maybe Alex, you might have heard.
I mean, at the moment, obviously, in terms of visas being issued for Canada, we are hearing that they are being issued, but it's in small numbers, and it's taking up to taking months to process. Some agencies have reported, I think, 8 weeks being the fastest, but I think that's more related to the COVID-19 situation. I think Canada. The growth we were talking about earlier was driven by a fast-track visa scheme for colleges, and that's now been applied to public universities who have that ability too. But there still do continue to be issues, specifically on the ESL students. I'm not aware if that's been resolved. I might have information on that from colleagues, but. Yeah, so there have been issues in the past.
Okay.
Even though Canada is doing a lot to rectify that, I think.
Let's hope somebody from the Canadian government's listening.
Yeah, I mean, we have good relationships with the Canadian government, and we have talked to them about issues, but specifically these will be dealt with in Vietnam, yeah, I'm hopeful that with the direction the government is going in Canada, I think especially the announcement that online study will count towards the post-study work permit, that's gone down extremely well in Vietnam. It's been very well received. Other reps from other countries are talking about it. That's how much of an impact it's had. So Canada's growth has been phenomenal, and I don't see that changing.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here from Susan James, who would like to know if there's any student or parent interest in studying courses less than degree level postgrad, such as A-levels, English language diploma courses. Hung, you mentioned increasing numbers of students considering high school in Australia. Would they also consider vocational education?
Yeah, for us, because again, the visa issues, vocational education, your likelihood of getting a visa, it's a bit more difficult than award programs that we call award programs. However, if the vocational education is on a skill set list where it leads to a shortage of skilled labor in the country, then it is easier. We haven't seen much of, well, the number for Vietnamese students coming to Australia for vocational is not as high as Thailand, because Thailand seems to be sending a lot of traditionally, anyways, a lot of students on, we call vet programs.
Right.
But for Vietnam, we haven't seen that much of a demand. For Vietnam, like Alex says, is still a very undergraduate market. And regarding English language, like I said before, I think most of them prefer to study back home and then come here for the award program.
And would that be with a local Vietnamese provider, or would they also be interested in a sort of global brand? Because you obviously work with EF. I mean,
yeah. So in Vietnam, I think there are 3 brands: Yellow, and then one was IOA, and then one is VUS. I think those are the 3 still dominant brands, and then there might be smaller ones, but then yeah, and then they can do that for much less of a cost than they do in Australia or anywhere else.
Great, thank you. Right, we've got 5 minutes left, so let me try and get a few more questions in. This is a good one from David. What are the differences between Vietnamese students from the geographic north and south? So, Alex, you nodded to a sort of more prestigious.
Yeah, it's hard to generalize, but I think we still can, because the north is, there is a preference to the UK and to more prestigious Ivy League, Russell Group of 8 institution. That doesn't mean there isn't anything in the north for other destination countries. It's the center of government. There's wealth. There's other cities like Haiphong, which are important sources of students. But there is a tendency, towards the UK. The south, maybe that's where it's more about migration options. What's affordable? What's a more practical study option? So the south, is the putting the economic gravity of the country towards itself, and remains a big source. So there is that variation. The south looking more to the US, more to Canada, maybe. There's also other locations to consider. I think we're getting to the point now where we can talk about other markets, cities like Da Nang, that are starting to become important destinations on the recruitment circuit. And there's opportunities there, I think, for the US, Australia, and Canada.
Okay, thank you. Very, very quick one from Vivian Chow. I think we've sort of answered that by talking about Haike's point about the growth of Canada, but she asks, is post-study work opportunity an important element for the Vietnamese student? I think what we're saying is depends where they live.
But yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. I want to give you all a chance to have another quick contribution. So I thought we might finish with a final question, which is, what do you think we'll see happening in Vietnam in the next 12 months, given that we are still emerging? I mean, Vietnam feels like it's emerged far sooner than us here in the UK, but it feels like Vietnam is certainly emerging post COVID-19. Ha, maybe I'll start with you. What do you think in terms of that you'll see in the next 6 months in terms of student appetite and actual likelihood to continue to study abroad?
I mean, during the past 3 weeks, ever since the lockdown was lifted, I got 3 more applications from students. And so it speaks, and I've been in touch with all the parents and students, and they are really revisiting the plan, the studying abroad plan, because for them, they feel like, okay, it's become safer now. And really, even though we're sort of living in like a bubble where it feels safe and the world out there is still changing every day, but even with the US, sometimes like the news comes out more positively with the new vaccine being tested and whatnot. So they're hopeful and that they can still go. But I guess for them, they're still in waiting mode. And I guess for us, as in-country reps, we're still trying our best to sort of in touch and getting new leads and getting in touch with students and parents. In terms of appetite for seeing a broad plan, I can say yes, it absolutely has, come back again, because in 2 weeks we're actually joining a school fairs in Hanoi to talk to students and parents, and it's all for studying abroad. It's called Studying Abroad Day. So it speaks to you, in volumes about the fact that if there's no interest about that, the school would definitely never organize it.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're very hopeful that in 5 to 6 months, if the situations in other destination countries gets better, we'll see it goes back to hopefully we'll go back to normal soon.
Great. Haike, what do you think? Are you expecting more people knocking on the door?
Yes. Well, I think one big change over all this is going to be a positive legacy from the coronavirus around online and blended learning. So traditionally, it's been seen as a sort of inferior form here in Vietnam and many other places. People prefer to do face-to-face. But I think the experience we've all been through, and I suspect that we're going to go through for some time to come, will change attitudes and we'll have vastly improved online learning experiences. And I think that's going to really shape a lot the transnational education piece as well, because the Vietnamese government now, for the first time ever, this month, is going to allow online and blended joint programs to be delivered in Vietnam, so between international and foreign, international and Vietnamese partners. So that's going to be a big trend, I think, blended and online.
Very interesting. Thank you. Hung, very quickly from you.
Yeah, so for us, it's given what's going on, supply chain disruption, etc. There's going to be more investment from overseas into Vietnam, and then so Vietnam's is coming out relatively unscathed from this whole thing. So we are investing more into the market, and because of our decline in other markets, we'll look at Vietnam to make up for that. So definitely, it's on its way up.
Thank you, Alex. Final word from you.
So yeah, we're hopeful that, as I mentioned, there's going to be more events like the one in Hanoi, and an increased need to engage with an in-country presence. And we're seeing interest from universities who don't have a presence in establishing one or expanding their existing presence. I think there could be some switching between destination countries over the next 6 months. The Vietnamese are watching the news, and they do have opinions about how different countries are coping with the current crisis. Anecdotally, we're hearing that there could be some changes in destination countries. Overall, that the demand and the growth of the market, it's not going to change. But I think institutions need to be quick to adapt and remain in frequent communication with their recruitment partners, be able to deal with that change.
Thank you very much. I feel like I've heard that a lot this week, but it's very true. Very good advice. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you everyone who's been listening in, and it's been a real pleasure. We'll see you at the next one. Thank you so much.